She bought a confiscated mansion for $809, the house where a corrupt official had died. But when the widow and her son began clearing out the dusty rooms, they found not gold, but evidence that had once been worth killing for. The house had been silent for years, until it chose those who were willing to hear it. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are from. The bus coughed its way through the rain-slick streets, scattering reflections of neon and sodium light across the windows, where Evelyn Gray sat with her hands clasped tightly around her purse. Her son, Lucas, slept with his head on her shoulder, the faint tremor of exhaustion in his breath matching the rhythm of the wipers. She watched the city slide by, the sagging awnings, the half-lit diners, the vacant lots, and felt the dull weight of another night's shift dragging behind her. She had long since stopped trying to count the hours of sleep she managed each week. Everything had narrowed to the same ritual: wake, work, pay, repeat. Her husband had been gone 3 years, killed in a construction accident that left nothing behind but hospital bills and a metal toolbox she couldn't bring herself to throw away. Since then, she and Lucas had drifted from one apartment to another, trading space for cost, until the rooms felt more like boxes. The last landlord had given her 2 weeks to vacate, 2 weeks to find a miracle. The miracle arrived not with light or music, but as a headline printed on a screen that flickered over her coffee cup. City Asset Auction. Confiscated properties for immediate sale. She clicked without thinking, expecting to see warehouses, rusted vehicles, empty parcels of land. But halfway down the list, she froze. Residential estate, Bridgewood Street, Lot 17. Starting bid, $899. She almost laughed. A misprint, surely. No house in the entire city, especially not in that district, could cost less than a second-hand car. Yet the listing was real, stamped and certified, with a closing date only 24 hours away. Beneath it, a note explained that the property had been repossessed following a government forfeiture. Her pulse quickened. She looked up the address. Bridgewood was the hilltop quarter, the place of terraces and ivy, where years ago officials built homes meant to display their prosperity. The estate had once belonged to a man named Conrad Vinn, Director of Infrastructure, City Planner, and later, the disgraced subject of a dozen investigations. He had died in the house less than a year before. The news archives were sparse. Tragic fall-down marble staircase. Death ruled accidental. The comments beneath told another story of payoffs, of documents destroyed in the night, of a man who'd tried to escape his own empire and failed. That evening, Evelyn sat at the small kitchen table while Lucas finished his homework beside her. The rain pattered on the window, like fingers tapping to remind her of time slipping away. She told herself she was only looking, that people like her didn't buy houses, certainly not ones with pasts that made the neighbors whisper. But the price lodged in her mind like a dare. She visited the municipal office the next morning, her uniform still damp from the hospital, her shoes leaving small, dark prints on the tiled floor. The clerk behind the desk was young, bored, and unimpressed. "You understand what this is, right?" he said after scrolling through the details. "That place has been vacant for months. The state took it over after Vinswell, after he passed. It's more trouble than it's worth. Mold, broken pipes, no power." "I understand," Evelyn said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He peered at her over the rim of his glasses. "You'd be the first to even ask. It's just paperwork, ma'am. $900 for the processing, really. You sure you want that?" She nodded. And just like that, she had done it. By afternoon, she was holding a thin envelope that declared her the legal occupant of a dead man's house. The drive to Bridgewood took her longer than she expected. The streets narrowed and climbed, the pavement giving way to old cobblestones that glittered under a gray sky. She passed through neighborhoods that seemed to fade between wealth and abandonment, until finally she reached the gate. The iron bars sagged under the weight of rust and vines. A single brass plate still gleamed faintly. Vin residence. Lucas pressed his face to the car window. "It's huge," he whispered. Evelyn cut the engine. The silence that followed was deep enough to feel physical, as though the hill itself held its breath. She pushed the gate. It groaned open. Gravel crunched beneath their feet as they approached the house. Up close, the building looked like a thing asleep for too long. The facade, once white, was veined with mildew. The windows were clouded, some cracked, some boarded. Ivy crawled up the columns, clutching them like desperate hands. And yet, even through its decay, the house had a strange dignity, as if it refused to surrender its memory of importance. Inside, the air was cold and layered with dust. Each footstep stirred a faint echo. The grand foyer opened upward into shadow. A chandelier hung askew, its crystals dim with grime. The marble beneath their feet still held a faint pattern of veins that caught what little light crept in through the windows. Lucas's voice was small. "Did someone die here, Mom?" "Yes," she said softly, "but not us." The electricity was dead, so they lit candles from the emergency kit she'd brought. Their glow traced the edges of furniture left behind tables with clawed legs, a sofa draped in a sheet, a piano in the corner, with one key pressed down as if frozen mid-note. In the study, they found a fireplace filled with ash and a phone still on the desk, its cord cut clean. On the mantel stood a photograph in a cracked frame. A man in his 50s, heavy-set, confident, with one arm around a boy. The glass over it was smeared, but the boy's smile was clear and unguarded. Evelyn turned the picture over. On the back, written in blue ink, were words nearly faded away. "If they find out, they'll take you too." She stared until the letters blurred, uncertain whether the message was meant for the man, the boy, or whoever dared to read it next. They slept that night in the living room on makeshift bedding. The wind moved through unseen cracks, carrying the faint scent of earth and something metallic, like old blood. Lucas fell asleep quickly, but Evelyn lay awake, watching candlelight flicker across the ceiling. Every few minutes, she thought she heard the distant hum of a telephone, the click of a receiver being lifted and set down again. She told herself it was the pipes, the air, the settling of old bones within the walls. Still, when the sound came again, long, measured, undeniably real, she rose. The study door was half open. Inside, the phone sat exactly where she had seen it, dusty, lifeless. Yet as she stepped closer, the faint vibration of its cord made the dust stir. She touched the receiver. It was cold, but there was a heartbeat of current beneath the plastic, a whisper of energy that vanished as soon as she lifted it. No voice, no signal, just breathless silence. She returned to the living room, lay beside her son, and listened to the rain pick up against the windows. Something inside her wanted to flee, to drive back down to the city and pretend she had never come. But another part, a quieter, stubborn fragment of herself, refused. This was her home now. Whatever the house had been, whatever it had done, it belonged to her. In the morning, the light broke through thin clouds, turning the dust into a haze of gold. She made coffee on a small camping stove and carried the cup to the front steps. The air smelled of wet leaves. From that height, she could see the city sprawling in muted colors, unaware of her, indifferent. Yet for the first time in months, she felt something close to peace. When she went to check the mailbox, she found an envelope wedged between the bars. There was no stamp, no return address, only her name written in shaky letters. Inside was a single photograph, the same image from the mantelpiece, but clearer, sharper, and newer. The boy's face was older, his eyes darker. Behind him the house loomed, bright and whole. Across the bottom, someone had written in bold ink, "Keep the house quiet." Evelyn stared at the message until her hands began to tremble. She looked up at the windows above her, at the silent reflection of her own face, and thought she saw movement in the glass. That evening, she began unpacking in earnest. Boxes, blankets, small things from their old apartment, tokens of a life lived cautiously. Lucas explored each room with wide eyes. He found a stack of newspapers in the pantry, dated the week of Vin's death. Headlines shouted of budget scandals, missing funds, inquiries closed without verdict. On the last page, a short article. Director's family declined to comment. They ate canned soup at the kitchen counter, the sound of spoons against metal the only noise. Lucas asked if they could paint his room blue. Evelyn smiled, grateful for something ordinary to cling to. "Of course," she said. Night came early. The power flickered once, then held. She walked through the hallway, testing each switch, each socket. In the master bedroom, she found a wardrobe still half full of men's clothes, suits covered in plastic, shoes polished and aligned. On a shelf lay a briefcase. She opened it expecting papers, but inside was only an empty leather folder and a small brass key. The tag attached read, "Office, lower door." She had not yet found any lower door. By the time she returned to bed, Lucas was asleep again. She placed the key on the nightstand beside the flickering lamp and closed her eyes. The wind had quieted. Somewhere deep in the house, a board creaked like a step, taken by something too heavy to be imagined. In the dream that followed, she was walking through a corridor lined with mirrors. Each reflected her face, but in every reflection, she was older, thinner, her eyes darker. At the end of the corridor stood a man she recognized from the photograph. He held out a hand to her and said, very softly, "Don't let them bury me again." She woke with a start, the key on the nightstand gleaming in the weak dawn. Outside, fog wrapped the garden like a curtain. The vines on the wall trembled, as if stirred by breath. Evelyn stood at the window and whispered into the silence, "We're staying." The house did not answer, but the air seemed to ease, the floor settling beneath her feet, as though in acceptance. That day, she began cleaning in earnest, scrubbing dust, throwing open windows, collecting abandoned objects. Beneath the clutter, she began to see the outline of what the place once was. The marble glowed faintly under her mop. The railings shone where she wiped them clean. Lucas hummed to himself as he swept. For a moment, they were simply a mother and child reclaiming space, rebuilding. But in the study, the photograph had fallen from the mantel, the glass shattered, and the boy's face torn through the center. Evelyn stood over it for a long while before setting it upright again. She did not notice that outside the gate, a black sedan had stopped on the road, its engine idling, two silhouettes watching the house in silence. By nightfall, the first lights burned again in the windows of Bridgewood Street, something the neighbors had not seen for almost a year. Some said later that the glow looked wrong, too yellow, too alive, as if the house itself had opened its eyes after a long sleep. Inside, Evelyn tucked her son into bed, smoothed his hair, and turned off the lamp. "We're home now," she whispered. The walls seemed to exhale in reply. The key on the nightstand gleamed faintly in the dark, waiting. Morning came to the house on Bridgewood Street, as though it had hesitated at the threshold, uncertain whether it was welcome. Pale light leaked through the high windows, touching the dust and peeling paint, filling the hall with the smell of wet stone and something faintly metallic. Evelyn woke before Lucas, sitting for a long while on the edge of the narrow bed, trying to convince herself that what she had heard in the night, the creak of steps, the almost human size of the floorboards, had been only the sound of a place settling back into life. Downstairs, she made coffee on the small stove they had carried from the apartment. The cup trembled slightly in her hands, as she looked at the brass key she had found in the wardrobe. Office, lower door. She had searched the house enough to know there was no lower door in the visible layout. The main staircase divided into two wings, one leading to bedrooms, the other to a shuttered corridor that ended at a wall covered in faded wallpaper. Beneath it, she could feel the faint vibration of hollow space, as though the house was hiding a pulse. Lucas joined her with sleepy eyes and a blanket around his shoulders. He liked the house, he said. It was quiet, but not unfriendly. He wanted to paint his room that day and maybe explore the garden. Evelyn smiled, grateful for his calm. She wanted him to believe this was only a house, not a mausoleum built from other people's secrets. While he worked upstairs, she walked through each room with a bucket and cloth, opening the shutters, letting light pour in where it could. The place seemed to shift under her care. What had been gray the day before now revealed color. The deep red of carpets, the oak gleam of panels beneath grime, the faint scent of cedar trapped in closets. Yet for every surface she cleaned, another mark appeared somewhere else. Scratches on the banister, a handprint on the dusty mirror, footprints on the hallway rug too large to be Lucas's. By afternoon, the house no longer felt empty. It breathed in time with her own movements. When she paused, it seemed to listen. In the late light, she heard a knock that was not quite a knock, a soft tap at the front gate. Through the window, she saw an old woman standing there, small and stooped, wearing a cardigan the color of dried leaves. Evelyn stepped outside to meet her. "I'm sorry to intrude," the woman said, her voice cracked but steady. "I used to live down the street. Name's Mrs. Heller. We all wondered who bought the Vin place. Brave of you, dear. Not many would." Evelyn forced a polite smile. "It was all I could afford." Mrs. Heller nodded, eyes narrowing slightly. "He was a complicated man, Mr. Vin. I met him once, years ago. Loved that boy of his more than anything. After the accident, well, the city said it was a fall. Some of us think otherwise." Evelyn hesitated. "You mean he was killed?" The old woman glanced at the house. "I mean, some debts can't be erased with signatures. He tried to make amends at the end, or so they say. But when you spend a lifetime building walls, someone's always waiting to seal you inside them." She left a jar of honey as a welcome gift and hobbled away. Evelyn stood in the yard long after, turning the words over in her mind. Someone's always waiting to seal you inside them. That night, while Lucas slept, she sat at the desk in Vin's study, tracing her fingers along the grain of the wood. Something caught under her nail, a seam, almost invisible, where the paneling met the floor. When she pressed, a sliver of dust lifted. Beneath it was a thin metal edge. She pried gently until the board came loose, revealing a shallow recess. Inside lay a weathered folder tied with string. She carried it to the table and untied it carefully. Pages spilled out handwritten notes, receipts, and something that looked like a confession drafted and never sent. The handwriting slanted heavily to the right, urgent, uneven. "I know what I've done cannot be undone. I thought I could build something clean from dirt, but everything I touched turned to rot. They used the children, the schools, the hospitals. I told them I was finished, that I would return what I could. The money is ready. If I sign the transfer, they will kill me before it clears. I can't prove it yet, but I'm close. The truth must survive me." The rest of the page was smeared, the ink washed into darkness. Evelyn sat motionless, her pulse thudding in her throat. The dates on the documents were from the week before his death. On one sheet, in red pencil, were 3 interlocking circles, the same symbol Lucas had found, carved into a loose tile near the garden. When she looked up, she saw her reflection in the glass of the window behind the desk. For a heartbeat, another reflection stood beside her, a man's outline, tall, indistinct. She turned sharply. The room was empty. She forced herself to breathe. It was just light, she told herself, just the suggestion of her mind, feeding on shadows. Still, she took the folder upstairs and hid it in her bag. She would decide what to do in the morning. The morning brought other visitors. 2 men in dark suits arrived unannounced, stepping out of a black car that idled at the curb. One was tall and broad, with a bland smile, the other thin and expressionless, holding a clipboard. They introduced themselves as officials from the Land Reclamation Office, here to verify the transfer of property. Evelyn invited them in, her heart beating faster. They moved through the rooms with professional detachment, but their questions grew peculiar. Did you find any belongings left behind? Files, perhaps? Unclaimed property? They lingered near the study, exchanging glances. No, she said, forcing calm. Just furniture, a few broken things. Strange, the taller one said. There should have been nothing left. The inventory was cleared. After they left, she locked the doors and checked her bag. The folder was still there. That night, she dreamed again of the man in the mirror, standing beside the piano with his hand resting on the keys. He said nothing, but his eyes were full of apology. Over the following days, the house began to shift in subtler ways. The air grew warmer, as if responding to her defiance. She painted Lucas's room blue, scrubbed the hallway, even managed to repair a few lamps. Yet the more she tried to restore normalcy, the more she felt the weight of unseen observation. The neighbors stared when she walked to the store. A car idled near the corner most evenings, and inside, small things changed position when her back was turned. A chair moved, a drawer left ajar. On the 5th evening, as rain began again, Lucas came running from the garden, holding something wrapped in cloth. "Look what I found," he said breathlessly. Inside was a rusted metal plate engraved with the same 3 circles. Beneath them, faint letters spelled out Eternum Trust. Evelyn recognized the name. It had appeared in the documents she had skimmed. One of the shell organizations Vin had supposedly used to funnel public funds. She hid the plate in the kitchen drawer and told Lucas not to mention it. That night, the phone rang again. This time she heard it clearly, the shrill echo filling the hall. She lifted the receiver with a trembling hand. Static. Then a voice low, mechanical, almost human. "Don't trust them." Then the line went dead. The next morning she found muddy footprints in the foyer. 3 prints leading from the door to the study, none leading out. Lucas was still asleep. The locks were intact. She cleaned them away with shaking hands. 2 days later, the same black car returned. The thin man came alone. "We've had some irregularities," he said, smiling too pleasantly. "Would you mind if we took a quick look at the basement access?" "There isn't one," she replied. He raised an eyebrow. "Every house of this design has one." She lied easily, surprising herself. "Then it must have been sealed before I moved in." When he left, she followed his path from the window. He paused by the hedge, as if listening to something she couldn't hear, then drove off slowly. That evening, Evelyn decided to find out for herself whether the basement existed. She took the brass key from her nightstand and walked through the silent corridors until she reached the narrow passage under the main staircase. The wallpaper there bulged slightly, the seams uneven. She pressed her palm to it and felt a hollow echo. The key in her other hand seemed almost to hum. Using a knife, she cut along the seam. The plaster fell away to reveal a small door flush with the wall, its surface smooth but for a keyhole. The key slid in perfectly. When she turned it, a click echoed through the house, deep and resonant, like a heartbeat from beneath the floor. A draft of cold air rose from the opening. She pulled the door wider, and saw stairs descending into darkness. The smell of earth and rust filled her throat. She hesitated, then fetched a flashlight. Lucas was asleep. She would not wake him. Each step creaked under her weight. At the bottom, she found a narrow corridor of concrete. Wires ran along the ceiling, old and dead. On the far wall hung a single light bulb, still faintly warm when she touched it. The room beyond looked like an unfinished office. A desk covered in dust, a chair overturned, a faint impression of something heavy dragged across the floor. In the corner, an old computer tower lay connected to a generator. When she pressed the switch, the screen blinked to life, lines of green text crawling upward. "If you are reading this, I am already dead." She froze. The text continued slowly, word by word. "They took everything. But not this. The truth is stored here. Keep it safe. They will come for it." Beneath the monitor lay a small box labeled backup. Inside was a flash drive and a folded piece of paper. On it, in the same handwriting as the notes upstairs, were the words, "Do not give it to the police. Do not trust the office. The house will tell you who to trust." She turned off the generator and stood in silence. Above her, she could hear the faint movement of air through the vents. No, not air, but something heavier, like breathing. The walls seemed to vibrate with it. Evelyn climbed back up, locked the door, and pushed the cabinet in front of it. She felt the shape of the flash drive in her pocket like a pulse against her thigh. Later, when Lucas woke, she told him they might have to leave for a few days. But he shook his head fiercely. "I don't want to leave. The house isn't bad, Mom. It just wants you to listen." That night, the rain intensified, beating against the roof in endless rhythm. Evelyn sat by the window with the flash drive in her palm, staring into the darkness. The city below shimmered faintly through the mist, unaware of the secrets lying in the foundation of one forgotten home. When lightning flashed, for a heartbeat, she saw the reflection of a man standing behind her. Gray suit, tired eyes, mouth half open as if to speak. Then darkness returned. She whispered into it, "I'm listening." Somewhere deep beneath the floorboards, a relay clicked. The power surged. Every light in the house flickered once, twice, and then glowed steady, as if the house itself had awakened to her words. She did not yet know that others had seen it too, the neighbors looking out from their porches, the black car idling at the corner, watching the old Vin residence burn with light for the first time in a year, a beacon announcing that the silence of the dead had finally been broken. The house did not sleep again after that night. Its lights, once dim and uncertain, held steady as if the walls themselves had decided to stay awake with her. Evelyn felt it each morning, the faint hum behind the plaster, the shift of air that carried the smell of damp paper and ozone. The flash drive she had taken from the basement seemed to radiate a quiet heat in her pocket wherever she moved, a small but insistent reminder that whatever she had found was not yet finished with her. She waited 3 days before daring to open it. In those 3 days, she watched the world outside narrow into a pattern of repetition. The same black car slowing each evening, the same anonymous calls that ended when she answered, the same silence when she stepped onto the porch and tried to see who was watching. Lucas stayed mostly inside, painting his room and pretending that everything was normal. His laughter in the hall sounded almost like music, and for a while, it helped her believe that they could still reclaim the peace she had come here to find. On the 4th morning, she plugged the flash drive into the old computer upstairs. The files appeared instantly, dozens of them. Some labeled with names she didn't recognize, others with dates stretching back more than a decade. There were scanned documents, contracts, invoices, transfers between ghost foundations, and video clips of meetings held in expensive offices, men in suits, shaking hands and passing envelopes across tables. One file was different, larger than the rest. She clicked it, and the screen filled with the image of Conrad Vin. He looked older than in the photographs, worn down, the arrogance stripped from his face. His eyes met the camera with a mixture of fatigue and defiance. "If you're seeing this," he began, his voice low and steady, "then I've failed to deliver it myself. They think this house will keep their secrets buried, but I built it to remember. Every wall, every wire, every hidden conduit in these rooms carries a record. I wanted the truth to have a home, even if I couldn't." He leaned closer, his voice a whisper. "They won't stop. They'll call it madness, a fabrication, but the files will tell you everything. I only ask one thing: don't let them destroy the house. It's the only witness I have left." The video ended with the faint click of a lighter and the glow of a cigarette. Evelyn sat frozen. It felt less like watching a confession and more like inheriting a curse. She could already sense the danger Vin had spoken of circling closer. Still, she couldn't look away. She opened more folders, scanning through the numbers until she found transfers to accounts that belonged not to Vin, but to names still sitting in office today. Officials who smiled from billboards downtown, men she saw on the news shaking hands with governors. Each document tied back to something called the Eternum Trust, the same symbol she and Lucas had uncovered in the garden. By evening, she knew too much to pretend ignorance. The realization carried both terror and clarity. She understood now why Vin's death had been ruled an accident so quickly, why the house had been confiscated before his body was even cold, and why the city had been eager to sell it for less than $1,000. It had never been meant for anyone to live here again. That night, she printed a few of the documents and locked them in her car. Then she sat by the window, waiting. The black sedan appeared just after midnight, stopping across the street. Two silhouettes inside, unmoving. The engine idled for nearly an hour before the headlights flared and the car rolled away. She didn't sleep afterward. The next day brought an unexpected visitor. A man in his early 30s, neatly dressed, but carrying the restless look of someone who didn't belong to quiet neighborhoods, knocked on her door. "Mrs. Gray?" he asked, showing a press badge. "My name's Ethan Rowe, the Tribune. I've been covering the Vin case for a year. I heard someone finally bought the property." Evelyn hesitated before opening the door fully. "What do you want?" "Maybe nothing," he said. "Maybe answers. People who try to ask about this house don't usually get very far." She studied him for a long moment. Something in his tone, earnest but wary, convinced her he wasn't one of them. She stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, he took in the hall with wide eyes. "I expected worse," he said quietly. "After what they say happened here." "What do they say?" she asked. "That Vin had a breakdown, that he started digging into his own contracts, talking about stolen funds and missing children's charities. 2 weeks before he died, he tried to schedule a meeting with a federal investigator. Never made it. The records vanished, and the case was closed." Evelyn brought him to the study and laid the printed documents on the desk. "He didn't imagine it," she said. "He was right. They killed him to keep it quiet." Rowe leaned forward, scanning the papers. His face changed as he read. "Where did you get these?" "They were here," she said simply. "The house kept them." When he looked up, there was something like belief in his eyes. "If this is real, it's bigger than I thought. But it's dangerous. They'll come for this. They already have." They talked for hours, tracing the connections across cities and names. When Rowe left, he promised to return with a recorder and a secure drive. "If we can prove even half of this, the whole administration will collapse," he said. "Just stay safe, Mrs. Gray." That evening, As she watched his car disappear down the hill, Evelyn felt both hope and dread. The house was silent, almost reverent. She could sense that it knew what she was doing, and for the first time, the silence felt like approval. 2 nights later, the retaliation came. Someone threw a stone through the front window, shattering the glass into the living room. Lucas screamed, and Evelyn dragged him away from the shards. When she stepped outside, she saw the black car speeding down the street, its taillights vanishing into the dark. She called the police, but the officer who arrived barely glanced at the damage. He took her statement with a disinterested shrug. "Probably kids," he said. "Happens all the time." After he left, she noticed that he hadn't asked for her name or any details about the car. The next morning, Mrs. Heller appeared again, carrying a basket of bread. Her hands trembled as she looked at the broken window. "You need to be careful, dear. Some people don't like what that house remembers." Evelyn wanted to ask what she meant, but the old woman only shook her head. They buried more than one man in these foundations. Vin was just the last to fall. That night, unable to bear the tension any longer, Evelyn drove to a motel with Lucas and locked the door behind them. But the house seemed to follow her, the creak of unseen steps in the ceiling, the whisper of static on the television when it was turned off. Lucas asked if they could go home. She said nothing. By morning, she had made her decision. Running would change nothing. The truth would only die if she abandoned it. They returned to Bridgewood, boarded the broken window, and set the computer back up. When Roe arrived later that day, he brought a camera and an external hard drive. Together, they recorded everything. The documents, the recordings, even the footage of Vin's confession. He promised to send it to multiple outlets at once. "If they try to silence one of us, the others will keep it alive." The publication came 3 days later. Headlines spread across the networks. Evidence links city officials to massive charity fraud. Photos of the same men from the files appeared beside words like investigation and indictment. And in every article, the same sentence repeated: documents recovered from the former home of Conrad Vin. Evelyn watched the news from her kitchen, her hands shaking. She knew what victory meant in stories like these. It meant exposure, but not safety. By evening, reporters gathered at the gate, cameras flashing, neighbors whispering. The mayor issued statements of denial. The men named in the scandal vanished from public view. But the most unexpected reaction came from the city itself. A council spokesperson arrived with a group of volunteers. They offered to repair the property, calling it a landmark of truth. Within weeks, the yard was cleared, the broken windows replaced, and new paint covered the scars. The transformation felt unreal, as though the house were being reborn. One afternoon, as she walked through the renovated hall, Evelyn found a plaque being mounted beside the front door. It read, "The Bridgewood Center for Restorative Justice, dedicated to those who dared to speak when silence was safer." She stared at the words until her eyes blurred. Somewhere deep inside the walls, a faint vibration passed through the floor. A sigh, almost human, like gratitude. Lucas thrived in the new calm. The rooms once heavy with dust, now echoed with children's voices as the center opened its doors to families seeking help. People came and went, leaving donations, flowers, stories. Reporters eventually stopped visiting. The headlines faded, and the world moved on. But Evelyn stayed. The house no longer frightened her. It had kept its promise. It had remembered. Late one evening, after the last visitor had gone, she walked through the quiet corridors, turning off lights one by one. In the study, the desk where she had first found Vin's notes stood polished and bare. On the mantel above the fireplace hung a restored version of the photograph. Vin and his son, the cracks repaired, the color softened. She touched the frame gently. You were right, she whispered. The truth lived here. The reflection in the glass flickered. For a moment she thought she saw him standing behind her, his expression peaceful. She didn't move, didn't blink, only whispered again. Rest now. Outside, the wind rose and swept through the garden, scattering the last leaves of autumn. The house, once a tomb, stood bright against the night sky, its windows glowing with the steady warmth of a place that had finally forgiven itself. Evelyn stepped onto the porch and looked out over the city below. The same city that had once ignored her, now forever linked to her name. Lucas came to stand beside her, slipping his hand into hers. It's beautiful, he said. It is, she answered. And it's ours. Behind them, the house settled with a soft creak, like a sigh of relief. The lights inside dimmed to a gentle amber glow, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Evelyn felt that the silence meant peace, not warning. The story of the house would become legend in the months to follow, a tale told by neighbors and reporters of a widow who uncovered the sins of the powerful, of a house that refused to let the truth die within its walls. Some said they could still see a light flicker in the study at night, long after everyone had gone, as if the man who built it remained there, keeping watch. Evelyn never tried to disprove it. She had learned that some memories deserved to stay. The house had kept its promise. She would keep hers. She would live here, raise her son here, and let the place breathe, not as a monument to corruption, but as a home reborn from it. In the spring, when the first flowers bloomed in the garden, she placed a small metal plaque beneath the oldest oak. Its inscription was simple. The house was never cursed. It was waiting for someone to listen. When she turned to leave, the wind moved gently through the branches, and the faint sound of a piano key pressed by invisible hands drifted through the open windows, one note, held long and low until it faded into the stillness of a place that had finally found its voice. If this story moved you, subscribe for more. Watch the next one, and share this video so others can see it too.